Good evening. Settle in, and let the noise of your day begin its slow retreat. We are about to embark on a journey, not to a place of myth or fantasy, but to a familiar celestial neighbor, our constant companion in the night sky, the moon. We are taught it is a world of magnificent desolation, a silent, dusty sphere of rock, its secrets all surrendered to science. But the oldest stories, the deepest whispers in the human soul have always hinted at something more. Tonight, we will listen to one of those whispers, amplified through the precise, methodical mind of a man who believed only in data, until the data itself began to tell an impossible story. This is the story of Dr. Aris Thorne, and the echo he found in the heart of a silent world. Let his quiet, focused investigation calm your thoughts, and let the profound mystery he uncovered be the landscape for your journey into sleep. There are only a few places left on Earth where one can experience true silence, not just the absence of noise, but a quiet so deep it feels like a physical presence. The Atacama Desert, here in Chile, is one such place. At 3,000 meters, the air is thin and sharp, and the sky is a shade of violet blue so pure, it feels less like an atmosphere and more like the beginning of infinity. My home, for the next 6 months, is a small, hermetically sealed quadrant of the Southern Celestial Data Archive. It is, to put it simply, a library for starlight. Here, data from the world's most powerful telescopes, both terrestrial and orbital, is collected, processed, and stored. My colleagues are mostly in Santiago, or scattered across the globe, accessing this place remotely, but my work requires a more hands-on approach. I am, for all intents and purposes, the sole human occupant of this silent, shimmering cathedral of information. Retirement, for me, was never going to be about gardening or golf. My wife Anya passed 3 years ago, and the quiet of our home became a different kind of silence. Not the profound silence of the desert, but an empty one. So I took this final contract, one last deep dive into the work that has defined my life. Seismology, the study of vibrations, of the way planets ring and tremble and whisper their inner secrets. My task is beautifully, poetically simple. I am to reanalyze the oldest, most reliable seismic data we have from the Apollo missions and use it to calibrate a new generation of geological modeling software. I am teaching a brilliant new mind how to think by having it study the classics. My evenings have a ritual that I find deeply comforting. After a simple meal, I brew a pot of strong black tea. I sit here, in the control room, surrounded by the gentle warmth and low hum of the servers that hold echoes of distant galaxies, and I look out my reinforced window at my subject, the moon. To me, the moon has always been a thing of stark, honest beauty, a simple world, no atmosphere to complicate things, no oceans to hide its features. It is a body defined by impact and stillness, a history written in craters, a geologist's paradise. I have always found a certain peace in its magnificent desolation, a sense of calm in its predictable, silent dance. That peace, however, is a memory from a week ago. Now, when I look at the moon, I feel a tremor of something else, something akin to the feeling you get when you realize a familiar room has been subtly rearranged while you were away. It began with Apollo 12. The dataset is iconic. November 20th, 1969. The astronauts Pete Conrad and Alan Bean were on the lunar surface. After they had safely returned to the command module, the mission controllers on Earth deliberately crashed the lunar module's ascent stage, the Intrepid, back onto the moon. The impact site was about 70 kilometers from the seismometer the astronauts had just deployed. The impact was equivalent to about a ton of TNT. It was a brilliant, simple experiment. Strike the moon with a known force, at a known location, and listen to the echo. I loaded the raw data into the new modeling system, a simple task, one I have performed countless times before with older software. I watched the familiar waveform appear on my main monitor, a flat line, representing the quiet of the moon. Then, a sharp, violent spike at the moment of impact, exactly as expected. On Earth, an impact like this would generate seismic waves that would last a few minutes, maybe longer, in certain geologies, before the planet's complex, water-rich interior would absorb and dampen the vibration. The wave would decay rapidly. I watched the screen, expecting to see that familiar decay curve, but it didn't come. The initial violent spike subsided, yes, but it resolved into something else. A new waveform. It was clear, shockingly coherent, and it held its amplitude. The seconds ticked by, then minutes. The line on the screen continued to tremble, a pure, resonant vibration that refused to die. My software can translate seismic data into audible sound. It's a useful diagnostic tool. Driven by a sudden curiosity, I engaged the audio translation, routing the output to my headphones. I listened, mesmerized. The textbooks I'd studied, the papers I had written, they all mentioned that the moon rang like a bell. It was a famous, poetic turn of phrase, but I had always assumed it was an exaggeration, a metaphor for a resonance that lasted longer than expected, 10 minutes, perhaps 15. But the sound in my headphones, the data scrolling across my screen, told a different story. This wasn't a metaphor. The moon was ringing. It was ringing like a colossal, hollow, perfectly cast tuning fork. The sound was so pure, so lacking in the complex overtones and rapid decay of a natural geological body, that it felt artificial. The vibration, the ringing, did not stop for nearly an hour. An entire hour, from a relatively tiny impact. I took off my headphones, but the hum seemed to linger in my own bones. The silence of the control room felt different now, heavier. I looked out the window at the serene silver disk hanging in the black sky. That silent, honest world of rock and dust. What was it made of that could hold a single note for so long? I am a scientist. My first, second, and third instinct is to search for a natural explanation. There must be a reason. A complex internal structure of unfractured rock. A series of vast interconnected lava tubes creating a planetary resonance chamber. The lack of water to dampen the waves. The explanations were there. The classic ones. And my job, my specific task, was to build a model that would prove one of them correct. I set my tea down, my hand steady. This was no longer just a calibration task. This was a puzzle. A beautiful, elegant, and deeply unsettling puzzle. And as I began to write the first lines of code for the simulation, I felt a spark of the old thrill, the excitement of the chase. I had no idea then where that chase would lead me. I had no idea that in trying to solve the riddle of the echo, I would shatter my own quiet, orderly world. For the next week, the simulation rig became the center of my universe. The problem of the lunar resonance was no longer just a task, it was a magnificent obsession. I was determined to build a world inside this machine, a virtual moon that would echo in the same impossible way as the real one. It felt like the purest form of science, an elegant mystery demanding an elegant solution. My first approach was the textbook model. I constructed a moon of solid, layered rock, a dense core, a thick mantle, a brittle crust, a simple solid sphere. I programmed the virtual impact of the Intrepid module and ran the simulation. The result was predictable. The seismic wave dissipated in under 7 minutes, a brief, chaotic shudder. The model was stable, logical, and entirely wrong. The data on my screen showed no resemblance to the long, pure tone of the Apollo recording. Next, I tried a more complex hypothesis. Perhaps the moon wasn't a solid billiard ball, but more of a rubble pile, its outer layers shattered and porous from eons of meteorite impacts. This deep layer of loose rock and dust, the regolith, could theoretically trap and scatter seismic energy in complex ways. I spent a day meticulously programming the new variables, creating a model of a fractured, cavernous world. I ran the simulation again. The result was different, certainly. The resonance lasted longer, almost 12 minutes. The waveform was more chaotic, but it still decayed. It still fell silent. It did not hold the note. Another elegant failure. It was around this time I sent my first email to Dr. Kenji Tanaka in Tokyo, a brilliant young theorist I had mentored years ago. I attached my preliminary models and the raw Apollo data. "Kenji," I wrote, "I'm having trouble reconciling the Apollo 12 resonance with any standard geological model. The duration is remarkable. Any thoughts?" His reply came within hours, filled with the polite deference he always showed me. "And Aris sensei," he wrote, "a fascinating problem. The accepted theory points to the extreme dryness and fractured nature of the lunar rock, creating a very high quality factor, a low attenuation. Perhaps the simulation requires a more aggressive scattering algorithm. It is also possible the Apollo seismometer had unforeseen resonance issues with the regolith it was placed on." I spent 2 full days building this final model. It was the most complex simulation I had ever designed, a delicate, virtual filigree of interconnected voids deep beneath the lunar surface. When I finally ran the program, I felt a genuine flicker of hope. His suggestions were logical, responsible. He was encouraging me to look for the error in my method, in the old equipment. He was encouraging me to accept the established explanation. But I had already run those simulations. I had modeled for every conceivable type of rock scattering, for every possible instrument anomaly. The numbers simply did not add up. The duration and purity of that ringing note defied them all. My final attempt at a natural model was the most exotic. For years, theorists have posited that the moon's interior could be a labyrinth of vast empty lava tubes, caverns miles wide, left over from its violent volcanic youth. Such a structure could, in theory, act as a massive resonance chamber. It was my last best hope for a conventional explanation. The result was the most interesting yet. The virtual moon rang for 23 minutes. The waveform was complex, filled with strange harmonics as the energy bounced around the simulated caverns. But it was still a chaotic, dying sound. It was the sound of a vast cathedral of rock, not a bell. And after 23 minutes, it too fell silent, while the real Apollo data kept humming along for more than 30 minutes after that. I emailed Kenji one last time. With the results of the lava tube simulation, his reply was shorter this time. "Fascinating, Aris sensei. The problem is clearly more complex than the textbooks suggest, but we must be cautious not to chase anomalies into speculative territory. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one." I knew what he was really saying. "Let it go, old man. You're getting lost." His politeness was a gentle wall, and on the other side of it, I was alone with my impossible data. Frustrated, I pushed back from the console. If the seismic data wouldn't give up its secret, perhaps other lunar anomalies could provide a clue. I broadened my research, pulling up papers and databases on the moon's fundamental properties. I started with its density, a known but often quietly ignored peculiarity. For a body of its size, the moon is far less dense than it should be if it were made of the same stuff as the Earth. The official explanation is that it was formed from the lighter, crustal material of a proto-Earth after a massive impact. A plausible theory, and the one I had always accepted. But now, it felt less like an explanation, and more like a convenient story designed to patch a hole in the data. What if the moon wasn't made of lighter material? What if it was simply less full? My search then led me to high-resolution topographical maps, compiled from decades of orbital scans. I focused on the largest impact craters, Tycho, Copernicus, the vast South Pole, Aitken Basin, and a strange pattern emerged. The craters were all bizarrely shallow for their immense width. An impact that creates a crater 100 kilometers across should have a corresponding depth of many kilometers. But on the moon, they were all flat-floored, as if the projectiles had punched through a soft outer layer and then struck something impossibly hard and unyielding beneath. I found a quote in an archived paper from a geologist in the 1970s. "It is as if the moon has a titanium hull just beneath its dusty surface." He meant it as a colorful analogy. I wasn't so sure. I turned off the monitor and walked to the large window of the control room. The moon was nearly full tonight, a brilliant, breathtaking silver disk against a sea of black diamond stars. It hung there, silent and serene. I thought back to my childhood, lying in the grass on summer nights, staring up at it. Finally, my search brought me to the most mysterious data of all, the long and surprisingly credible history of transient lunar phenomena, or TLPs. For centuries, reliable astronomers, from William Herschel to the observers at major modern observatories, have logged reports of strange, fleeting events on the lunar surface, brief, localized flashes of light, patches of reddish or greenish mist that appear and disappear in craters, geometrically shaped shadows that move in ways they shouldn't. These reports are the ghosts in the astronomical machine, often dismissed as instrument glare or outgassing from shallow moonquakes. But the sheer volume of them, the consistency of the descriptions over hundreds of years, painted a picture of a world that wasn't quite as dead as it appeared. I leaned back, the hum of the servers filling the silence. The moon didn't ring right. It wasn't dense enough. Its craters were too shallow, and it flickered with strange, unexplained lights. These were not fringe conspiracies. These were known, documented scientific anomalies, each traditionally kept in its own separate box. But now my mind was placing them all on the same table, and they were all pointing in the same direction. I wonder if the moon has changed, or if I have, or if perhaps the stories we tell ourselves about it, the ancient myths, the children's tales, the scientific models, are all just different ways of avoiding the truth of what we're really looking at. And for the first time in my professional life, I began to wonder what would happen if I stopped trying to make the data fit the story, and instead started listening to the story the data was trying to tell me. It's strange. As a boy, I could stare at the moon for hours, convinced I could see the face of the man in the moon, his two big eyes, his somber mouth. I knew it was just an arrangement of dark volcanic plains, a trick of shadow and pareidolia, but the image was so clear, so real to my young mind. Now, as a scientist, I look at it and all I see is data, proximal ejecta blankets, Highland terre, Mare basalt. The moment I decided to stop trying to force the data into a story I already knew was the moment I was truly free. My entire career had been based on the foundational assumption that the objects of my study, planets, moons, asteroids, were products of natural, albeit complex, geological processes. But what if, in this one single instance, that assumption was wrong? What if the moon was not a poem written by gravity and time, but a machine built by an unknown hand? The thought was absurd, a violation of every scientific principle I held dear, and yet, it was the only hypothesis that fit the bizarre collection of facts I had assembled: the impossible resonance, the low density, the shallow craters, the transient lights. It was a single, elegant key that unlocked all the separate, stubborn doors at once. I went back to my console. I was no longer a geologist trying to model a planet. I was now a cryptographer trying to decipher a signal. I sent one final email to Kenji. It was short, a farewell to the world of conventional thought. "Kenji," I wrote, "I am setting aside the geological models for now. I am going to treat the Apollo 12 resonance not as a natural echo but as a complex signal containing a non-natural component. I will be applying signal processing algorithms to attempt to isolate it." His reply was, as always, swift and kind, but this time, it was also final. "Aris-sensei, I respect your intuition, but I must professionally advise against this path. It is speculation based on anomalies, not evidence. Please, do not let the silence of the desert create patterns where none exist. Enjoy the stars, my old friend." He was releasing me, gently, respectfully. He was severing the tether, allowing my solitary little boat to drift out into the sea of madness alone. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of liberation. I was on my own now. The only truth I could rely on was the one the data itself would give me. I repurposed my software. I took the audio translation of the Apollo 12 seismic data, that hour-long pure resonant hum, and loaded it into a deep filtering signal analysis suite, the kind of program SETI uses to search for alien broadcasts, or that engineers use to find a single faulty bearing in the roar of a jet engine. My process was slow and methodical, a digital excavation. First, I applied a filter to isolate and remove the initial high-amplitude shockwave of the impact itself. The violent, chaotic crash of the Intrepid module vanished, leaving only the long, sustained note that followed. Next, I began to peel away the primary resonant frequencies. I told the computer to identify the loudest, most dominant tones in the signal and to gently subtract them. It was like tuning a vast orchestra, telling the cellos and basses to fall silent one by one. The loud, clear hum began to fade, thinning out, revealing a complex web of fainter, stranger harmonics beneath it. Finally, I applied the most powerful tool I had, a fractal decay analysis filter. It's an algorithm designed to identify and eliminate chaos. It listens for the signature of natural random processes and erases them, leaving behind only patterns that are ordered, structured, and non-random. It was a digital search for a single perfect footprint on a beach after a storm. I engaged the filter and watched the screen. The waveform, which was still a complex web of faint overlapping harmonics, began to simplify. The filter was eating the noise, digesting the chaos. The line grew flatter, quieter. For a long moment, I thought the result would be nothing. A flat line, a confirmation that beneath it all, there was only the silence of a dead world. Kenji would have been right. But then, something remained. It was buried in the deepest layers of the data. A ghost in the echo, a signal of impossible regularity. It was a pulse, a rhythmic, repeating waveform. It was not a message. There was no complex language, no attempt at communication. It was far simpler and far more profound. It was the sound of a machine in a state of idle, the sound of a power source, the hum of a vast dormant engine, the rhythmic pulse of a life support system on standby. It was the signature of a colossal piece of machinery, left running in low power mode for thousands, perhaps millions of years. It had been there all along, a constant, quiet pulse, completely undetectable, until the seismic shock of the Apollo impact had made the entire structure resonate, amplifying the faint, internal vibration, allowing me for one brief hour in 1969 to hear its song. I took the headphones off, but the sound was imprinted on my soul. I sat back, the immensity of the discovery washing over me, not like a tidal wave, but like a slow, cold, rising tide. The moon was not a natural satellite. It was an artifact. Its low density, its shallow craters, its strange lights, its impossible resonance. It was all explained. It was a vehicle, a station, an ark, parked in a mathematically perfect orbit around our world for a purpose I could not even begin to fathom. Its crew long gone, its system still humming with a faint residual power. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could never share this. The data was too obscure, my interpretation too radical. It was the ultimate conspiracy theory, but I had arrived at it not through speculation, but through a cold, logical process of elimination. I was a man trapped with an impossible truth. Slowly, I stood up and walked to the door of the observatory. I pushed it open, and the cold, thin air of the Atacama night washed over my face. I stepped outside, onto the dry, cracked earth. The sky was a brilliant, shocking tapestry of stars, and hanging in the center of it all was the moon. It was no longer a comforting light, no longer a friend. It was no longer a geological object to be studied. It was watching me. I felt its age, its silence, its unimaginable purpose. It was a sentinel, a silent, patient machine, waiting For what? I did not know. Waiting for a signal, waiting for a return, or perhaps simply waiting for the tiny noisy creatures on the blue marble next to it to finally fall silent, as all things eventually do. I felt a profound sense of awe and a loneliness so vast, it felt like a new dimension of space. I had solved my puzzle, and in doing so, I had lost the moon I had known my entire life. In its place was a terrible and beautiful mystery, hanging forever in my sky, humming a silent rhythmic song that now only I could hear.